Hey Artnerds, today we are doing another comic tutorial. Today we are doing a perspective tutorial for comic art. So you guys can see that I have a printout of one of my roughs and I am affixing additional paper to it, and this is because I'm going to need a lot of space for the hand-drawn perspective grid that I'm going to do. Now you can do perspective grids digitally. Manga Studio makes it very easy for you, and there's even Photoshop brushes that'll help you throw down a perspective grid really quickly. But you know, for me, there's just something about doing comic pages by hand. Maybe I'm just old-fashioned, I don't really know. But even though I have access to these tools, I still like doing my perspective grids by hand. So I went ahead and I used a 2-foot long clear acrylic ruler to lay down my horizon line, and I realized that I'm going to need even more paper. I'm going to need a lot of room. So what I usually do when I'm doing perspective grids is I start with a sketch. You guys can see that sketch very faintly printed onto my printer paper. And that sketch includes my best guess at perspective. And the more you do this, the more you're going to train your eye, the easier it is going to be for you to kind of guess what the correct perspective will be. So I base my perspective grid off of the perspective in my sketch, and I'm really just trying to tighten everything up and make it a little bit more accurate. So what I do is I take a major line in the background, maybe it's the windowsill line, maybe it's the floor line, and I draw that back, or I follow that back to the horizon line, make a point, and then I use that to draw my grid, and I do that for both sides. Now you want to avoid your vanishing points being too close to one another and too close to the center, particularly in 2-point perspective, which is what we are doing in this tutorial here. And you want to avoid that just as a rule of thumb because it makes it look a little bit strange and a little bit distorted. There are a lot of artists though who use that technique to great effect to give the viewer, to give the reader a sense of unease, like things are not quite right. So any rule that is a rule can be broken to better tell your story. So I just want you guys to remember that. So the first thing I'm doing is I am blocking in the bed that Naomi is sitting on. I find that it really helps to start by blocking in a large form in the background that I can kind of seat or stand my characters on. So if they're leaning on anything, if they're standing on anything, I will usually draw that object first, get that figured out, and then draw the character. And it saves me a lot of redrawing. Once I have the bed kind of figured out, I can go ahead and start blocking other things and adding more details. And I'm using a ruler for this because for some reason, anytime I try to draw a straight line, it always ends up like crooked and leaning off to the side. So using a clear acrylic ruler like the one shown here is super helpful. And even though I drew my perspective grid, that just kind of helps me better understand the space I'm working in. When I'm drawing lines, I still lead them back to the vanishing point. And if you're having trouble understanding vanishing points and perspective, there's a lot of really good tutorials out there. I can't necessarily recommend any particular YouTube tutorials mostly just because I learned from a couple of really good books. Now, one of these books is older, it may be out of print, it may be more difficult to find, but it is the Walter Foster perspective book in their Artist Library series, and I'll try to have that in the description for you guys. And it's by William F. Powell, and I found this book to be the easiest to understand resource for me, so I really like it. That's what I taught myself perspective on. I also really like Andrew Loomis's perspective book, and even though I'm standing here in front of my bookcase looking for it, I do not see it. So you guys can check the description below for a link to that as well as the title. And then there are also a couple of perspective books for comic artists. I think one of them is literally just called Perspective for Comic Artists. And I have a feeling I pulled those books out of my stash so I could show them to my students. So they're just not where they're supposed to be. But you guys can check the description below for those titles. I highly recommend all of them. Even if you're following along with tutorials like this one, having those books and working through them, treating them like exercises that you work through, like you would solve math problems, is a great way to be comfortable and familiar with using perspective. Now, there are all kinds of digital tools out there to help you create your own backgrounds. You can use SketchUp, you can use 3D modeling software. Heck, you can even use The Sims. That's what I used to use. I used to use The Sims to help me model backgrounds so that I could then reference them later. Whatever tools work for you, it's great. But I do think understanding perspective can really help you take your drawing to the next level. So since I established the main object in the room that Naomi is interacting with, I'm going to go ahead and start sketching her figure in. Right now we're kind of at the stick figure phase. This is constructive human anatomy, and I use this method all the time. Pretty much everything I ever draw, I use some form of constructive human anatomy. And I have several tutorials here on this channel where I walk you through it, and I also teach constructive human anatomy in my From Stick to Figure class. So if you're ever in the St. Charles Parish, Louisiana area or in the Nashville, Tennessee area, you might want to look and see if I'm offering one of these classes. And what I really like about constructive human anatomy is you are able to recreate figures from reference or recreate them from your own imagination. And it helps you to consistently draw characters and figures over and over and over again. So if you're somebody who you can draw a character great one time and then never ever again, they never look like the same character, understanding constructive human anatomy and constructive facial anatomy will really help solve some of those problems. I also want you guys to note I don't really add a whole lot of details to any particular thing until I've kind of fleshed out and understand the whole. So if you're curious about why I'm using a colored pencil to do my underdrawing, I'm using a Pilot Color Eno in soft blue, but they make 8 other colors. And what I really like about Pilot Color Eno is it's very erasable and you can ink right on top of it. It also plays very well with watercolors and with alcohol markers. Using this non-photo blue underneath allows me to create an underdrawing. Imagine if I tried to do all of this using graphite. It would get super smeared, it would get really dirty, and it would get really hard to understand. It would get very confusing. So what's cool about using colored leads is if you use a light enough color and then you pencil on top of it using a darker graphite, you'll be able to drop those lighter colors in programs like Photoshop. I have yet to play around with that in like Affinity Photo. I have tried to do it in Metabang Paint and I couldn't figure it out. But if you know how to drop the contrast so much that you can drop non-photo blue, just leaving black in those kind of art programs, don't hesitate to let me know down in the comments below. You never know who it might be helping. Okay, so now that I have everything kind of sketched in, it's time to start penciling. And I am using one of those big heavy-duty metal drafting pencils that I warn you guys not to use. I am using a Pentel Graph Gear 1000, I believe. And what I really like about this is it can take a lot of wear and tear. The downside to that is it tears up my hand really badly and it makes my arthritis act up. So if you want to draw for the rest of your life, please develop better drawing habits than the ones that I have. So what I have inside this heavy duty tank of a metal pencil is I have really, really soft 3B lead, probably made by Pentel. And the reason I'm using such a dark soft lead is A, it goes down over that non-photo blue really smoothly. B, it picks up really nicely from my scanner. And C, there is a lot of contrast between this really dark, rich 3B lead and the blue of the non-photo blue and the white of the paper. So it makes dropping the non-photo blue in Photoshop much easier. I probably could opt to go over this using a fine liner pen, like a Sakura Micron, but using a pencil allows me to continue to erase it. So if you don't really need to erase, if you find you don't really make too many goofs once you get your sketch finished, then go ahead and ink it. That's going to give you the highest contrast. But for me, using the graphite, having this stage allows me to iron out a lot of problems. For me, when I'm making comics, the more stages I have where I can revise what I do and where I can solicit critique, the better my end result is going to be. So as I mentioned earlier, I can't draw a straight line to save my life. So fortunately, I have my handy acrylic ruler. I can pull it out and it'll help me draw nice, neat, straight lines, and it saves me so much more time. Once I'm at the point where all I'm doing is drawing straight lines in for the background, the page is basically done. It's almost finished being penciled. Also, I do want to point out, this is a single page standalone illustration. I have another tutorial coming up really soon where I walk you through my process for drawing an entire comic page panel by panel. So I hope you guys will keep an eye out for that. If you're looking for more comic content, I have a wonderful Intro to Comic Craft series here on this channel and over at natosoup.blogspot.com. I really recommend you guys head on over to the blog version of it, not only because some people just learn better reading rather than watching, but because I often go way more in depth about certain things than I'm able to do on this channel. So now I'm at the point where I'm basically just drawing straight lines using my ruler, lining them up on the horizon line, and just trying to keep everything neat and tidy. There are some posters in the background that I'm going to kind of freehand just to give it kind of a more organic, taped up to the wall feeling. I want to thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope this tutorial was helpful, useful, and informative for you guys, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. This is a page from my bonus chapter from my webcomic 7-inch Kara. The second volume should be hitting Kickstarter really soon, so if you like my art and you want to help support what I do, please keep an eye out for announcements on that. Of course, my work is never done. I am writing notes to myself for when I scan and digitize these and I make corrections digitally. So please keep an eye out for my upcoming video where I show you guys how to do perspective in the individual panels. And please check out my Intro to Comic Craft series here on the channel. Bye guys!